Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1158 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Not gonna lie guys, I'm pretty excited about this review because I feel like there's a lot of places where we can read between the lines. So I want to do that with you. But on a more general level, this chapter was just a joy to read. I really liked it. I think that this is the first time that we've really lingered in the older pirate world. Like, because of Hachinosu and the Rocks Pirates, their relationship with Roger and the Kuja Pirates, we're just getting our clearest picture yet about what the world of pirates as a whole was like a generation before. Did anyone else out there watch Black Sails? Because this reminds me, the vibe reminds me a lot of that. I suppose if you are unaware, the whole premise of Black Sails, where the story sort of began, is there was something that brought a bunch of pirates together that weren't necessarily friendly, and certainly did not trust one another. So in Black Sails, the person who accomplished this happened to be a woman, and it was related to business. And absurdly, as is typical with One Piece, you have Shakky kind of doing the same thing. So I just want to make sure that you are noticing this and that you're picking up on this, right? This is, again, technically a King Harold flashback. And what does King Harold want to do? Well, he wants to bring peace to the world. He wants to bring the world together. And in the middle of this flashback, Oda highlights Shakky, who is doing this without even trying. She's like actually bringing the pirate world together. Honestly, guys, if she had the ambition, if she wanted to, I think that she could recruit most, if not all of these people into her crew. They'd join in a heartbeat. I think that we're literally looking at a woman who had the potential to become a Joy Boy-like figure, a Nika-like figure. And in my opinion, this starts to contextualize some things that we pretty much know are going to happen. I talked about this earlier in the week, but when Shakky arrived in Hachinosu, Gloriosa, who knew her well, basically said, I don't think that she's suffering from love sickness. And so I took that as truth, and that ended up not being the truth because we see in this chapter her interactions with the Roger Pirates, thinking about Rayleigh. It's just abundantly clear that Rayleigh is probably what brought her to this island. Now, the story could still end up being more complicated than this, but let's not jump down that rabbit hole, right? It's totally unnecessary. Because reality is that the result of Shakky arriving in Hachinosu is the pirate world is being brought together, centered around her. This would totally explain why the world government infiltrated Hachinosu in order to take her, which I am still 99.9% certain actually happened, by the way. Shakky still remains the highlighted treasure of Hachinosu. Also, if we're thinking about parallels and we're thinking about Shakky as a Joy Boy, as a Nika-like figure, you should start thinking about a character like that scheduled to be executed. So far, we already have at least two other Nika-like characters that went through a story arc similar to this, when Kaido and Orochi boiled Oden, as well as Roger's execution. But in both of these cases, neither Oden nor Roger fought back, and nobody really tried to save them. So just keeping in mind the way that Oda is writing this story, I think it's very possible for Joy Boy to have been scheduled for execution, but then that became more of like Ace in Marineford. So we know that the world government came to Hachinosu and stole something. It's probably Shakky, and through this context you realize, wow, Shakky is literally a threat, although she isn't trying to be a threat. Like, think about the world of pirates today. It is so unlike what is happening in Hachinosu in this flashback. You know, like, the pirate crews are separated. They have their own territory. They don't interact with one another. The difference is stark. And I would heavily guess that this is by world government design. Like, we have little details thrown throughout the story of like, hey, if two Yonko were to encounter one another, the Marines need to prepare themselves. It seems like the Marines, rather than trying to take down Yonko, just try to keep them separated. You know what I mean? I think that they're afraid of what eventually Luffy will actually do. Unite the pirate world, or maybe just straight up unite the world. So yeah, whether or not Shakky is aware of this or not, what she is doing right now is painting a target on her back. Really not too dissimilar to King Harold. And we already know that the Gorosei and Imu are very interested in Harold. But yeah, maybe a bit over-explaining here, But if you look at Harold and you look at Shakky, I think that each one of them possesses a quality that Luffy has. Might also be able to throw Rocks and Roger into this mix as well. You put these various aspects of each one of them together and you have the chosen boy. Like Shakky, Luffy makes friends easily and is not really looking to change the world. But unlike Shakky and more like Harold, Luffy has a great ambition. It's definitely more intentional from King Harold, but he is literally trying to change the world's perception of giants. And again, Luffy is not trying to do this, but his actions change people's perception of pirates. Harold is intentionally sailing in order to try and make new friends. Luffy also does this, but passively. But very much unlike King Harold, and I guess more similar to Rocks, perhaps also Roger, Luffy is more secure as a person. Talking here about Harold being manipulated by the world government to attack Rocks. Manipulated to do something he clearly does not want to do. Making friends is more important than staying true to himself. It's a distinctly un-pirate-like mentality, at least ideally, which Roger aptly sums up within the chapter. Pirates live to plunder, and we don't stop until the prize is claimed. Another way of saying pirates take what they want. So sure, you could argue that King Harold, by attacking Rocks, is doing what he wants. The prize that he is seeking is Elbaf joining the world government, or connecting with the rest of the world. But we all know that that's not the case because his dreams were bigger than that. He wants to believe that destruction of anything would be a waste, which should include Rocks. So in this case, he's really not taking what he wants. And this lines up with the result of Harold and Rocks' duel. Nobody won. And the subtext of all this is neither really wanted to win. I personally think that in this same situation, Luffy wouldn't have even fought to begin with. He's only gonna do the things that he wants to do. But I really do want to sit down and talk about Rocks and Roger in pirate mentality in general. The fulcrum for this chapter, in my opinion, is Roger's line that pirates live to plunder, and we don't stop until the prize is claimed. So I want you to think about this with respect to what we know about Rocks D. Xebec. Because honestly, as I read this chapter, I couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for him. A subtle but recurring theme within this chapter, as well as within the whole flashback, is Rocks is unable to get the things that he wants. We'll end up talking about this more, but he wanted Shakky, didn't get her. He wanted Harold on his crew, didn't get him either. Hell, he even wanted Roger to respect the fact that Hachinosu was his territory and Roger couldn't just come there, and Roger did so anyway. So once again, Rocks didn't get what he wanted. But truthfully, I think that what Roger said in this chapter is as applicable to Rocks as it is the Roger pirates. Pirates live to plunder, and we don't stop until the prize is claimed. And as I say this, you might think to yourself, well, that's clearly not the case for Rocks because he stopped pursuing Shakky. He stopped pursuing King Harold. Perhaps this is some criticism of Rocks as a pirate. So in my opinion, the question that we should be asking is whether or not Rocks is like Luffy and is basically incapable of giving up. As of right now, this is clearly a real debate. But if you pointed a gun to my head, right, my gut feeling, my intuition, what we saw in this chapter is misleading. Honestly, I feel for Rocks. In part, I kind of sympathize with him because I feel like, in some respects, I'm kind of like him. Because there's just some things that I've personally experienced where it's like, I just don't get it. But I'm sure that everyone, for instance, has met somebody who just like socially just doesn't get some things. A common one in my experience is somebody who clearly wants friends, but doesn't have a great idea of how to make them. And honestly, this is how I see Rocks. I like constantly remind myself that yes, the Rocks pirates are awesome and Hachinosu is poppin' right now, but nobody actually wanted to come there because of Rocks himself. So in a small way, I think Rocks has accomplished significant parts of his dreams by being resourceful and utilizing unorthodox methods. He wanted an awesome crew, nobody was willing to join him, so he's like, well, use DAVY backfights. Essentially, I think as a parallel to Luffy, what Luffy said in Arlong Park, right? Rocks is nothing without his crew. Once he acquired crew members through DAVY backfights, then suddenly, well, people wanted to join. All of this happened to catch the attention of Shakky, which has exponentially increased the effect. It's actually mildly crazy that Rox wanted Harold the entire time, and Harold is similar to Shakky in being this guy that a lot of people really love, was unsuccessful in recruiting Harold, but the role was eventually filled, even though Rox never intended it, by Shakky. Basically, it seems like Rox is intentionally seeking out Nika-like figures to be the magnet. I know that a lot of you aren't necessarily going to understand this, but this is almost like a universe where Usopp is the captain of the Strat Pirates and Luffy is a member. Meanwhile, I understand that Rox is very strong, but he's also kind of role-playing as the captain. And everyone else currently is playing along as well, but this won't last forever. So at the very least, I would like to believe that perhaps in a somewhat similar way as Blackbeard, Rox is resourceful and isn't so willing to give up on the things that he wants. He'll figure out some sort of method to acquire the thing in a way that nobody is expecting. Think Blackbeard acquiring the Guruguru no Mi in the middle of Marineford. He clearly wanted the fruit, right? But if you're planning to take the fruit, then in most cases, you would be planning on attacking Whitebeard yourself. That really isn't so easy to do. But Blackbeard waited for the right moment, where much of it was done for him, making the impossible much more possible. And this could even be considered to be Blackbeard's plan because he set this all up from the start with Ace. Maybe he had an understanding of what the world government would do with Ace and what Whitebeard would do when the world government got him. Think Blackbeard acquiring most of his crew, brinking in to Impel Down. Think Blackbeard acquiring the title of Shichibukai by capturing Ace. All of these results were extremely unlikely, and Blackbeard figured out how to make it happen. So you do some more reading between the lines, and you realize that Oda was kind of overt in this chapter. The reason why Shakky liked Rayleigh, at least one of the reasons why Shakky liked Rayleigh, was that Rayleigh was the only guy who didn't act stupid around her. And this is something that Oda has thrown in at other parts of the story as well. Think Luffy and Boa Hancock. Boa Hancock fell in love with Luffy the moment that Luffy had basically no interest in her. But yeah, this is so clear because all of this gets inverted with Roger and Gloriosa's relationship. Roger showed up, head over heels in love with Shakky, and then Gloriosa throws herself at him and he said, "I told you no, I'm not into lovey-dovey women who throw themselves at me." Gloriosa rightly says, but if Shakky asked, it'd be different. That makes no sense. The general philosophy here seems to be we desire the things that we cannot have. But if you really think about it, there's not that much difference between Gloriosa and Roger, or Roger and Shakky, or Rox and Shakky, and Rox and Harold. It may not be the same type of love, but Rox, throughout the course of this flashback, has literally been throwing himself at King Harold, and the result is ultimately the same. This is not a coincidence. I'm really curious just how many people notice this. Rox x Harold is a thing, and it's very cleverly hidden within all of these actual love stories. But if you believe in this philosophy, at least in the story of One Piece, that we want the things that we cannot have, then things between Harold and Rox following this chapter have now changed. Rox says, "Consider our business closed. You won't be getting another invite from me again." Guys, this is low-key a breakup. It's very easy to take for granted the things that you already possess in quotations. You could literally be in a relationship that you're very mid about and you don't really like anything about the other person. But the moment that the breakup happens, you feel loss. So I guess what I'm saying is it would be very realistic following this duel between Harold and Rox for Harold to actually value his friendship with Rox now that it's gone. So I'm literally saying that perhaps the one thing that Rox needed to do to recruit Harold onto his crew would have been to not seem so desperate about it, not be that available. It's also crazy that this applies to Harold's relationship with the world government as well. Harold, like Gloriosa, like Roger, like Rox, is chasing after the entity that he cannot capture, while ignoring the person that is clearly expressing that they want him. And hell, guys, this even applies to Rox and Loki. This is everywhere in this flashback. So again, my opinion here, something that could realistically happen is following this duel, Harold just thinks about the duel itself, what happened, and why. I think that he'll want to make amends with Rocks. And in my opinion, this is going to be the justification for why this was not the last time that Rocks and Harold met. So look guys, do I think that Rocks had this fight with Harold on purpose, that he expected the world government to try to manipulate Harold to attack him? No, I don't think that any of that happened. But that doesn't mean that Rocks can't use it. And I think, despite what Rocks said, he still wants Harold on his crew. So with Rocks and Harold, Rocks' endgame in all of this was attempting to convince Harold that the world government were the bad guys and that really he should just join up with him. He basically says all of this is a waste of your time. But if Harold is apologetic for what occurred here and is looking to make amends, suddenly Rocks has the power. Bear in mind that throughout this relationship, which has lasted maybe like 10 years or more, Harold has never sought out Rocks. It is Rocks who has constantly chased Harold. Honestly, if Rocks remains true to his words, this itself argues that if Harold and Rocks met again after this moment, it was Harold who was the one pursuing it. So if Rocks is the kind of character that I've spelled out in this review, he has an opportunity here to win once and for all. We know from the prior God Valley flashback that Jenny was responsible in releasing intel about God Valley to the rest of the world. So my theory is that Rocks received this intelligence and saw an opportunity to show Harold once and for all the evil of the world government. Basically, Rocks invited King Harold to God Valley, which is, I think, what the narrator implies, that this unorthodox friendship had come to an end. The two would not meet again for some time, not until the day of a certain incident, God Valley. But if this theory is not true, the only other way that I could see it is if the world government invited Harold to God Valley. Basically, you know, if you want to join the world government, you still need to take out Rocks, so come fight with us. Which would absolutely be a huge moment if it happened, and also incredibly wild and incredibly hard to believe. If Harold ends up siding with the world government during God Valley, I mean, like, he's at that point straight up evil. So I'm just gonna throw this out there as well. Stranger things had probably happened. But it would be an insane plot twist, and I definitely don't right now believe. So I just want to make sure to reiterate this, right? We've made an argument that despite what Rocks said in the chapter, he had not actually given up on what he wanted. Because he's a pirate, and pirates don't do that. But like Blackbeard seems to embody, right? Rocks has a great appreciation for opportunity or fate. So I know that people are not going to like to hear this, but I do not actually think that Rocks has given up on Shakky's love either. Or at the very least, he would seize an opportunity if it presented itself. So I've gotten several comments to my last theory video, especially after the spoilers dropped, that, oh no, this theory is suddenly wrong. God Valley didn't start because of love. And I totally understand that a lot of this comes from a place that people just don't want this to be true, but I really wouldn't count your chickens before they've hatched here. Shakky is still likely the treasure of Hachinosu that the world government stole and took to God Valley. Roger pretty much spells out that he's not going to give up on her, at least not until the quote-unquote prize is claimed. So Roger would almost definitely be very motivated because of love. And if not, like, romantic love, at least friendship, right? Then we just need to discover for sure whether or not Rocks is the kind of pirate who gives up. I'd heavily wager if the Harold theory is true, then Rocks will definitely still be pursuing Shakky's love. So while some details have changed, the majority of the meat and the bones of that theory remains intact. But obviously all of this would add intrigue to what exactly is going on with Rocks in this chapter. People speculate that, oh, he's got a look on his face like he's got a child coming. So we assume that there's some other relationship that may be in play. But the way that Rocks has been going about it is just weird. It's just strange. Like, they start talking about it, and clearly nobody knows who this woman is, and he's like, hey, that's none of your business. So he's very open about his love for Shakky over these last several years, and then actually has a relationship, potentially a child, and nobody knows what's going on there. It's all very sus. The fact that he doesn't want anybody to know about it, in my opinion, screams to me that it's not a woman that he actually loves. He comes across as embarrassed. Potentially because he knows that as a pirate, he should take the things that he wants and is not doing that in this case, so he's failed. This is very bad for your reputation as a pirate. Was he literally trying to make Shakky jealous by having a child with another woman? Was this his thought process? I'm just gonna go ahead and say it, guys. Where we're standing right now, it feels like the best theory for the identity of this woman is Kurozumi Higurashi. Either that or the identity of this woman is not relevant. But I could totally see Higurashi grooming Rox, basically telling him, hey, if you want Shakky's love, I know how you can get it. Then naturally, after all that, Rox would be pretty embarrassed. That would be quite understandable. But it does seem like Oda is trying to cultivate Rox to be a guy that will do whatever it takes. I do believe that this would fit that description. And just to make sure that I spell this out, we know that long term, eventually Roger does give up on Shakky, and I think that this will probably coincide with Rayleigh having claimed the treasure. Oda really doesn't do romance very often, if at all, so I'm curious if he can actually pull this off. I mean, I assume that he can, but we just haven't really seen it. But the way that I envisage all of this is very similar to the conversation that we've already been having, right? Shakky is super available to Rayleigh. Rayleigh knows that Shakky likes him, and he doesn't want to tie himself down. But how does his mentality change when suddenly she's taken from him? Basically, in my opinion, I think God Valley played a big role in facilitating the romance between Shakky and Rayleigh. Surprisingly, I'm actually very excited about this. You don't really know what you have until it's gone. Despite all the tragedy that we know has occurred for the Roger Pirates and in God Valley, it is kind of sweet to know that at least some of this had a happy ending. But at the very least, all of this serves as a reminder that love is absolutely a treasure, and is most likely going to be very related to the One Piece. I actually have a very specific prediction regarding this, but I'll save it for another time because it requires the right words. Anyway, one last theory before we moved on. It's been pointed out to me that there's a lot of visual similarities between the way that Oda depicted Roger and Rox in this chapter and Luffy and Usopp in Water 7. If you guys recall, I had a theory from a very long time ago that Rox and Roger and Garp were all brothers, similar to Ace, Sabo, and Luffy. Link in the description. But in this chapter review, we've also talked about how it seems like Rox can never actually get what he wants in a normal way. So I'm just wondering out loud whether or not one of Rox's first desires was actually to have Roger on his crew. It would certainly fit the trends here of Rox pursuing Nika-like figures, both Shakky and King Harold. Roger would be another one. So hypothetically, at some point in the past, Rox treated Roger in a very similar way as he treats Harold and Shakky. And the very same as Harold and Shakky, also because Roger wanted to be a captain himself. Roger was like, no. Essentially, the idea that I have in my mind is that as children, Rox and Roger had this Usopp-like fake pirate crew. And again, as children, Rox was the captain. But then, of course, Roger left the crew to pursue his own adventure. But I just wanted to make sure that I said this out loud because you can consider this with all the other things that we've talked about. But yeah, I suppose there won't be a better time to talk about the end of this chapter. So as I've sort of already laid out, there were a lot of people that did not want God Valley to be started because of Shakky, and this chapter gives a lot of people some hope. We see a meeting between Figurlin Garling and the Gorosei, and Garling basically says that he found the perfect island for the next hunt. But the reason that this island is perfect is incredibly interesting and mysterious. He says, while their abundant resources would certainly prove valuable for us, we just made an outrageous discovery. It was a completely unexpected find, and the Great One will surely be pleased with it. So Garling found something that he knew would be of interest to Imu. We then fast forward in time by about a year back to God Valley, and we discover that Shanks and Shamrock have been born. Apparently they got their mother's red hair, and it's heavily implied that the father is Figurlin Garling, which I suppose we already knew. So look guys, now is the time to cook if you got the ingredients. I'm genuinely curious as to what the community might be able to cook up with this. And I also have a feeling there's gonna be a lot of people that aren't gonna like what I have to say. So sorry about that ahead of time. But just to make sure I'm clear here, I really want to speculate this to be something awesome. You know, like cool, a powerful, a weapon related to the ancient weapons, you know, that sort of vibe. I want to speculate that, but I think that a lot of, like, even if I tried, it would be a reach. I simply do not possess the evidence that I need to speculate this, not that it is impossible. For instance, something I think somewhat realistic and cool would be a thing related to the ancient kingdom that just happened to be preserved in God Valley. Also, I just can't shake the visual that God Valley looks something like a tuning fork. Or perhaps something is still located in God Valley that was actually responsible for splitting this mountain into two. I'm not exactly sure why Imu would be interested in the Black Blades, but that's another thing which comes to mind as generally something that would really hype up the community. How awesome would it be if we found Excalibur? Or Thor's hammer, which can only be wielded by Thor. But yeah, I could throw these random ideas at you for quite a while, but that's just what they are. They're random ideas. I have no real justification other than, ooh, cool thought. So at this point, you guys should know that if ever I make a theory, whether it's right or wrong, yeah, I build up a lot of justification for it. So if you guys ask me what Garling discovered in God Valley, like a thing that I could actually argue, the most substantiated idea is Shanks and Shamrock's mother. She was the outrageous discovery. Basically, we're arguing that it is not a coincidence that Garling began the chapter telling Imu about a great discovery he made, and then we ended the chapter with the sudden reveal of the birth of his two sons, Shanks and Shamrock. The two scenes are very related to each other. But yeah, I'm not even entirely sure of how to explain this theory to you, but it's just been something that a lot of people have speculated for a very long time, that red hair is actually important to the story of One Piece. Shanks decided to call his crew the red-haired pirates, and just frankly, red hair is actually very, very rare. It doesn't seem so rare because we know Shanks and we know Nami, but it is. Now, there's actually a mechanical reason for this, and I think Oda has actually said this on the record. He simply does not like shading red hair. Like, there's so much more work involved with red hair, so that's why the majority of characters don't actually have it on a technical level. But Oda is an absolute master at taking these sorts of things and actually incorporating or using them in some capacity. So a red-haired lineage could actually be important. So the first idea to throw at you is that this woman is related to the ancient weapon Uranus. You can effectively think of her as another version of Shirahoshi, and/or prophecies exist that the ancient weapon Uranus can be identified through red hair. This is also kind of a shot in the dark theory, but I do like that Nami, who also has red hair, also has a lot of talent regarding weather. And the ancient weapon Uranus was the god of the sky. A lot of people for a long time have speculated that the powers of Uranus could in some way relate to the weather or the heavens. So you could potentially think about Nami in a similar way as Jinbei or many of the other fishmen. Jinbei has the power to control whale sharks specifically, right? But there's some version of this that is even better. In this case, from Fishman Island, Shirahoshi controls the Sea Kings, right? So if the same sort of thing is applied to the lineage of red hair, Nami has the ability to sense things relating to weather, a lot of innate talent, but there's somebody who can actually control it or do something else incredible. And who knows, guys, this could interrelate with the weapon that Imu has utilized recently in the story, destroying Lolosia, that thing. Like, we don't know exactly when Imu came to possess it. Perhaps that is related to God Valley and or this woman. But at least with this, it would make some sense for Garling to want to have a child with this woman, because the lineage itself is important, perhaps related to some aspect of history. Like, I just want to throw this out here. We know that the sun god is an important deity throughout the last several thousand years in One Piece, and a person or lineage with red hair could potentially be equated with a sun god. I know we're reaching, guys. I really hope somebody in the comments has a better theory. But yeah, if you actually ask me what I think, and I've already made theories about this, I think that the prophecies indicate an important person with red hair. Think about Madame Charlie's prophecy regarding the boy in the straw hat destroying Fishman Island. Like, her vision here was incredibly vague. And it seemed like most of the details were obscured except for one highlighted attribute, in this case, the straw hat. So we know that prophecies exist relating to Nika. And if you assume that these prophecies were made in a very similar way as Charlie's prophecy, then you could absolutely have some sort of vague prophecy about a person with red hair, and perhaps a few other notable attributes, such as a missing left arm. So thinking about it this way, essentially what Garling discovered in God Valley is an important person relating to prophecy. And another thing to just keep in mind is that some aspects of this timeline is clear to people. Odin knew that Wano would be freed in 20 years' time, or Joy Boy would appear in 20 years' time. So you know, you can have a rough estimate of like when an important person is supposed to be born. So in this case, Garling and Roger could actually be parallels of each other. We know that Roger wanted his son to be the child of destiny. It's fair to wonder if Garling may have had the same motivations here. But really where this theory starts to separate itself in my mind is how it interrelates with other parts of this flashback that we're reading right now. Think about Shanks talking with Scopper in Elbaf, right? Where Scopper refers to him as a child of destiny. Think about Estrid following the birth of Loki. She refers to him as a cursed child. But he's probably not the only cursed child born in this flashback, because now we have Blackbeard. And my current headcanon is that the world government had some hand in the birth of Blackbeard as well. Blackbeard is probably another person related to prophecy. And obviously you can parallel all of this to Loki in the current story and how his life has been shaped by prophecy, whether true or not. But yeah, guys, I really hope that you're following along with this theory. But if you're looking for a simple way to describe it, I think that either Shanks or Shamrock is a destined cursed child. And Garling somehow knew that even before they were born, just by who their mother was and the color of her hair. This kind of theory would also explain why Garling didn't seem too concerned with saving both children. Somehow Shamrock was raised by the world government and Shanks was taken by Goldie Roger. I kind of wonder if they just wanted one of the children to die, because two was unnecessary. And from all of this, I think it has become incredibly likely that we're going to see Rox attempt to kill either one or both of these babies. Just seems like something that we would later be able to parallel with Blackbeard. You know, inherited will and all that. This was pointed out to me in the video that I made recently, but this could be the reason, the main reason why Rox and Roger fought. Because Rox wanted to kill baby Shanks, and Roger was like, a bit too far for me. And this would work extremely well with one of the most prevalent themes in the entirety of One Piece. Existence cannot be a crime. Just being alive is not a sin. There's no crime in living. While we think about this in the context of somebody like Nico Robin, this same thing actually ends up being true if you think about a celestial dragon child like Shanks, if the power changes hands. One of those incredibly real debates that people still actually have in the real world is the idea of bad blood, or greater or inferior bloodlines. So look, genetics is real, and I think that genetics is also real in the story of One Piece. Like, as an example, Luffy, is incredibly powerful and it's related to his family. Many other characters are very similar and share traits of their parents. But it seems as though One Piece's philosophy is that we are all intrinsically good. It's our environment and our desires which start to create evil. So I'm going to gloss over this whole desire aspect of it because it's a big can of worms to open, but long story short is, we've seen Shanks grow up under the tutelage of the Roger Pirates, and Shanks is one of the greatest people on the planet, undoubtedly. But if the Celestial Dragons were ever dethroned, there would be a lot of people that would attempt to completely exterminate this bloodline because of the actions of their fathers or their forefathers. Basically, the Celestial Dragons would be demonized. And again, this works incredibly well with the rest of this flashback because you literally had a child-born Loki who looked like a demon. And then his mother threw him off of the tree. It's symbolic. Loki was never born evil despite the fact that he looked like a demon. But as dreams become reality in the story of One Piece, I think also fears become reality. Or I suppose nightmares. Estrid treated Loki as if he were a demon and literally made her nightmares come true. I do hope that you guys understand the moral in all of this. Long story short is it would make a lot of sense for somebody to attempt to kill baby Shanks. It would thematically fit in with the rest of this flashback. But yeah, I guess the last thing that I have to say about this chapter relates to the cover story. Man, we haven't talked about the cover story in so long, but this cover story is wild. So if you take yourself back to the cover story of chapter 1154, you see Yamato, and the text box says, "Go pay your respects at the grave of the hero born in the West Blue and raised in Ringo. Then in chapter 1157, it says, he fought against Kaido to protect his village, but perished without leaving a body behind. Then in this chapter, it says, here lies the heroic pirate of justice. And we finally see the name on the grave, and the name is Kozuki Moria. Bro, Gecko Moria was adopted by the Kozuki family and raised in Ringo. I saw someone actually made a prediction similar to this, and kudos to that person because wow. The main evidence for this theory, aside from various characters from Wano such as Ryuma being one of Moria's zombies, is that the name Gecko actually possesses the same symbols as Kozuki. They are just reversed, which is fascinating in and of itself because we have Imu reversing characters and turning them into demons. Moria looks like a demon, and he changed his name to be the inverse or the reversey of Kozuki. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, my first thought when I saw this is this has to be a retcon, right? This has to be a retcon. But, you know, as I've read some discussion about this and thought about it, I don't think that it is. At the very least, I think that Oda had this planned out when he dropped the Kozuki name. I suppose if there is a retcon here, and it would really depend on when the Kozukis adopted Moria, would be that Moria does not talk like the rest of the samurai. They have a very distinct way of speaking. But to me, it's fair that when Oda introduced Moria in Thriller Bark, he hadn't yet figured out exactly how the people of Wano would speak. But yeah, at the very least, I am completely convinced that in the post-time skip, Oda has been saving this idea of Moria being related to the Kozuki, which would be a span of give or take 10 or 15 years. But just in case you couldn't tell, given a few hours, I really have no problems with this and am kind of stunned. The actual circumstances of Moria being adopted by the Kozuki in the West Blue is extremely interesting, and I wonder if that detail might crop up at some other point in the story. Basically, we know that Wano's borders were closed. It was not very often that people would come in or come out, and this was a big deal with the story of Odin. But I think that it's fair to assume that if Moria was born in the West Blue but raised in Ringo, then it was likely a samurai from Ringo that found Moria. The daimyo of Ringo was Shimotsuke Ushimaru, who, if you recall, is the dude who looks a lot like Zoro. And in an SBS, it was canonically revealed that this person is Zoro's great uncle, the direct descendant of Ryuma. But it's probably important to note that Moria was not adopted by the Shimotsuke family. He was adopted by the Kozuki family. So ask yourself, why would the Kozuki adopt Moria and then raise him in Ringo? Guys, the thing that seems most obvious here, or the best idea, is that Moria was adopted by a member of both families. I believe that he was rescued by a woman of the Shimotsuke family, potentially Ushimaru's sister, who then either at this time or sometime later married into the Kozuki family and adopted the Kozuki last name. So basically, Moria's adoptive father was a Kozuki and adoptive mother was a Shimotsuke. Guys, it is very likely that this story interrelates with how Zoro ended up in the East Blue, as well as Koshiro and Kuena. Zoro's family, very similar to Odin himself, did not like being penned up in Wano. But it just seems like the story being told is that Moria loved Wano and loved his family and was a great person to the people. Kaido arrived, he attempted to fight him, and then lost, and after he lost, was too ashamed to return. Or at least wasn't going to return until he had acquired a crew powerful enough to defeat him. But this argument that we've laid out about Zoro's lineage is also important, right? Because this seems to be the primary family which has commonly left Wano over the last several decades or centuries. Meaning if Moria was raised by them, then him leaving Wano also makes a ton of sense. So in this chapter, the dialogue tells us that Moria was considered to be a pirate of justice. I literally do think that Moria left Wano and became a pirate, which is the same reason why he would be there when Gold D. Roger was executed. So the guy literally had his own pirate crew, not just of people from Wano, then heard of what occurred in Wano with Kaido, and then that's when they fought. It is crazy how much this makes sense. Mind-blowing, in fact. And now I find myself suddenly hoping that Moria eventually finds his way back home. Please, Oda. But anyway, guys, I know that we spent a long time talking about themes and analyzing stuff, but this chapter was great. Loved the Roger and Rayleigh dynamic, loved Shakky's love note to Rayleigh, how Shakky interacted with all the pirates in Hachinosu. Whitebeard seeing all this unfold and is just like, bro, I don't care. Seeing more of the Roger and Rock's rivalry, and then Rock's emotional duel with Harold. It was kind of short. I feel like if it had been longer, it would have been even more powerful, but I still felt it, all the way leading up to Shanks and Shamrock's birth. But as always, guys, I'm curious as to what you think, whether you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. If you're interested, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.